most breweries deal with. You produce CO2 into the atmosphere during fermentation. And then on the other end, you have to buy CO2, like food grade CO2, to re-inject into your beer to give it that fizziness.
Hi there, food enthusiasts. My name is Chris Raczkowski, your host today for the FutureFoodCast, where we talk with thought leaders in today's food industry and discuss the trends and technology that are shaping the future of food. Very, very happy today to be speaking with Stephen Tyson and Bernardo Zamora, who are founders and, in order, the CEO, brewmaster, CTO of Karbon Brewing in Toronto. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much.
We'd like to get a little bit of introduction to both of you. What were you both doing before you got Karbon Brewing started, and kind of what led you up to that big jump into this space? And Bernardo, let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Yeah. For me, I've been in the brewing industry for over 14 years now, always working within operations. I have a degree in chemical engineering and also a master's in brewing and beverage technology from the University of Munich. Before Karbon, I was working at Mill Street Brewery in Toronto as the brewing manager. So basically running brewing operations for the main facility at Mill Street. When I heard about Karbon, it was basically I was looking for a change in direction into what I was doing. I wanted to have more active participation in a company. Kind of was a very good challenge. Tyson will kind of go more into depth into what we do. For me, it was the challenge of kind of bringing sustainability at the forefront in a brewing company at the beginning. This is what we started out with. And for me, it was as all my studies from the side of the chemical engineering, the systems, its processes, and making more sustainable. And then as a brewmaster as well, being able to develop great beers through the systems and also putting sustainability first.
Well, that's a great span of experience that you bring with you into Karbon. And for those that don't know Mill Street, also a great brewery, it would seem, thanks to you, Bernardo. But Stephen, let's hear a bit about your background and what brought you to be a founder of Karbon Brewing.
Yeah, of course. And I want to give a shout out to Bernardo because he's definitely the brains behind a lot of what we do here. So my background is mostly on the business side of things. So I worked in the hospitality industry for a long time. Obviously, this is a podcast about future food trends and things like that. And so I saw a lot of beverage space from multiple different angles. I was both a bartender, a manager, or a dishwasher. I worked my way up through the food industry at all aspects, event manager and stuff. And I ended up being a consultant for, food and beverage companies, and specifically small business owners who wanted to improve their operations from P&L statements to ordering to supply chain and things like that. And so, through that experience with my business partner, Eve, who works with us as well now, we started to identify what the gaps were in the industry. And I'd been kicking around in the sustainability space for quite a bit, just on a personal level. It was something that I saw as an interest in my life and something that I wanted to explore more. And so basically, we got an opportunity to work on a project. This was mid-pandemic, and obviously the food industry and hospitality industry, which was paying our bills at that time, kind of got devastated. And so we started a project on a hotel kind of in the Kingston, Ontario area. They wanted to focus on sustainability and put, farm to table agriculture, build a community space that hadn't been in that community in a long time. It's a place called Wolf Island. And basically, we got this opportunity to consult for these guys, and they were working on this project. And it was kind of a eureka moment for us because we finally were able to apply what I'd been learning about sustainability and, building a proper business, a value-based business, and kind of combine it with our passion and our hospitality background. On the island itself, there was actually a hop farm. So we were like, oh, that's interesting. Hops are great. We like beer. And basically there was an abandoned brewery as well on the island. And so we started to, kind of two and two together. I had been learning about sustainability. We'd been working on this project, this idea of a community space, this idea of what does the future of business look like, social impact, things like that. And what if we were to combine that with beer and brewing? And so that's kind of where we brought Bernardo in, because obviously we didn't know how to brew beer at the time. And we started to just build out what would Karbon Brewing look like, if we put sustainability first. And so that's kind of what our whole thesis is here is, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement on efficiencies, on energy usage, on waste reduction, things like that in brewing. And so what if we were to just ask the question and put it first? How can we brewing more sustainable? And that's kind of what we do here at Karbon Brewing.
Amazing. I am a great student of the craft beer industry. I try to study daily, but I think one of the great things about the craft brewing space is that, the entrepreneurs, they're all generally committed to some aspect of sustainable business, sustainable environment, et cetera, because it just seems to be the ethos that goes with this space. But it's really interesting to hear, especially for the purpose of this podcast, where we do focus on technology and sustainability in food space, that your entire business thesis is putting sustainability first in the brewing space. And that is how you're growing a very, very successful business. Maybe tell us a bit more about your business today. You've told us how you got started. Obviously, Karbon makes beer. What's your full scope of activities with Karbon Brewing?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point. A lot of people in our industry are working on solutions, which is great to see. And to your point, this is an agricultural based business, right? This is, thousands of years old. People have been using their crops and their agriculture to make beverages. And so, there a lot of what has to be considered when you brew beer is what is the impact on the environment? How does that involve, agriculture? So, sustainability is something that brewers generally care about. But I think to an extent of how do I, reduce my local impact, but not actually scale that technology or those solutions up to, make an impact on the broader industry or the broader world. And so that's kind of the technology aspect that you're talking about, where we said, okay, Bernardo, you have this, master's degree in brewing beverage technology. How can we make beer better? And how can we develop the technology that goes behind brewing beer and the inputs and outputs that go along the process? So if you look at the entire scope, what goes into beer and how it gets delivered to your door so that you can enjoy it and be a student of craft beer, there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of opportunities there as well. So you basically have to grow the product, the inputs with water and utilities and resources and stuff. And then you basically have to process this product into beer, which is the end solution. You then have to package it. You have refrigeration involved, you have transportation involved, and then you have the end of life cycle, which is recycling programs. And, what do you do with the waste, right? So again, it's a consumable product. And so again, from a technology perspective, can we do it better? And then can we scale this technology to the point where we can share it with other breweries or other industries or food and beverage producers and kind of make it better and more efficient? So a lot of what Bernardo's thesis and research has been on is, what does a circular economy model look like from a technology perspective? Can we build that pilot brewery? Can we build that technology ourselves? And then can we share it with the world? And how does that, actually make an impact on sustainability and climate change?
Again, it's really encouraging to see this coming out as the real thesis of the business, the real business plan. As we, talk further, I want to kind of explore the supply chain side a little bit and also the downstream side, and maybe we'll focus on the packaging. But I know that you're also making significant efforts internally in your processes, the technology development and integration that is aimed at sustainability. And maybe that's a topic, Bernardo, there's one or two things that you would want to focus on. And what are the technologies that you're bringing to your business that are making it more sustainable?
Yeah, basically, when we started all this was having an in-depth look at the overall process, looking at your ins and outs in terms of your raw materials, your energy, what type of energy do you use? What is your source for that energy, and what can we do differently? I think the brewing process itself is a process that lends itself to being more self-sustainable than any other, because you have a byproduct that could be potentially used as sources for energy. You have your spent grains, you have your surplus yeast from your fermentation processes. You may have spent hops from dry hopping processes. All of these byproducts from production, depending on the size of the brewery, it could be, if you're very small, usually as simple as going to a landfill. Or bigger breweries, what they do is they usually send them to farms as cattle feed, which is the better option, of course. But as we know, cattle produce methane, produce CO2 and it's not recapture or control or reuse. It's just going up the atmosphere, and we know the effect that methane has on the in regards to climate change and how much more powerful it is than CO2 as a greenhouse gas, right? We've been studying what can we do with that rather than just giving it away for farms. What can we do? Because there is energy. If cows can use it to produce, like to grow, feed themselves and grow, there's energy there. So we've been studying that and how to do it. There are ways. There are breweries, for example, that they dry their spent grain and then they burn it. And with that, they're producing clean energy, clean heat for the hot side of brewing. But then you need a lot of energy to get those grains dried, right? We've been looking at other options, for example, anaerobic digestion of these byproducts, and which is something that's been growing in like the agricultural enterprises, that they have been using more and more these types of systems to produce their own energy. So we're looking into that, then combining it with cogeneration systems that can generate not only heat, but also electricity. And then you can also, it's almost like building like this big Lego set piece where there are technologies there that have existed for many years, but there are other technologies which are the ones that are commonly used and are the ones that are commonly offered to breweries, like in terms of cooling and heat generation and that sort of thing. So that's what we've been focusing on, is how do we turn this byproduct into a source of energy rather than just a waste for us. And then after we do that, how do we, that fuel that we're getting byproducts, how do we process it into heat? How do we process it into electricity? And then coal as well, which is the big utilities you need in brewing. Of course, you also need water, but water, you, depending on where, like right now, we don't have an actual facility. That's what we're working on. But depending where you are, you might get your water from the city, or you might get it from a well, etc.
It sounds like you're doing a lot of things that your customers are going to be interested in. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that, on how you're sort of educating your customers on how carbon brewing is actually doing quite a lot to add to sustainability, which these days has become an important buying decision for a lot of people. One of the obvious byproducts of brewing beer also is CO2. And I'm curious, I think we talked about this a little bit before, Stephen, but what approaches do you have of sort of managing that potential resource, where for most situations, that's just a waste gas that goes relatively harmlessly up into the air, other than the greenhouse gas effects of that. But is that something that you're also addressing with carbon brewing?
I think, sorry, go ahead, Bernardo. I was going to say, this is probably a Bernardo question in a lot of ways, just because it's more of a science
Excellent
one.
What's been happening in the last, let's say, 20 to 30 years is that more and more smaller craft breweries have been surging, right? In the US, in Canada, it's turning more like it already is in countries like Germany, that basically breweries are like bakeries, that you have your trustworthy brewery, that you only walk by with your growler or whatever and get your beer close by. But let's say that the technology manufacturers, the classical ones, are mostly focused like specifically for this type of technology in terms of recuperating the CO2 from fermentation and reusing it to re-inject, because that's what happens with CO2, and that's something that most breweries deal with. You produce CO2 into the atmosphere during fermentation, and then on the other end, you have to buy CO2, like food grade CO2, to re-inject into your beer to give it that fizziness. So it's this thing where, you're wasting a valuable resource and then purchasing it. Other companies that are basically extracting it from operations that are tied to, for example, like oil production and that. So it's like not necessarily more sustainable. So there are systems that can recover CO2 from your fermentation and clean it and get it ready to be reintroduced into your beer. But the classical equipment is very expensive and also not thought for breweries of a certain volume of production. They are thought for larger breweries, let's say here in Canada, like the Molsons, the Labatts, but the smaller players cannot afford these types of systems. There is a company in Houston that started to offer like smaller systems, which is very good, and I think they're spreading over the US, and I think Calgary got the first one as of recent. So yeah, there are ways you can recover, and now with all the technology that there is in terms of carbon capture, we've been looking into that actually, like not only recovering what we produce, but recovering what's in the environment and trying to re-inject it into our product with wood, which would allow us not only to do it for beers, but then looking at other types of products like seltzers, carbonated waters, and that sort of stuff that would amplify our portfolio of products for sure, but also draw CO2 from the atmosphere. So we're looking into those different technologies, basically.
There's a lot of great efforts that is essentially being packaged into your product. And again, we'll definitely talk about the sort of the marketing opportunity there that I think you could get a lot of traction on. But you also mentioned something that I found interesting, all experiencing sort of this distributed, decentralized culture that's growing up around us, and that you're not doing this necessarily just to get your own company's advantage here. You're looking at how can you bring these technologies in, get them proven out, show that they're useful and effective and cost effective, and then share that information with other companies so that you're not only driving sustainability for Karbon Brewing, but you're supporting sustainability potentially in many other breweries that are sort of your industry partners, if you will, the coopetition.
Yeah, no, I'll touch on that if that's okay. But yeah, I think that's a large portion of what sustainability actually means, right? If we found the solutions and we applied it in our small, bubble or footprint, that doesn't actually create change in a lot of ways. And so we owe it to, the actual trend of sustainability, or the actual, idea of this, how do we fight climate change, to find the solutions, as Bernardo was saying, from all over the world. And this becomes not a problem that just Ontario or just Canada or just North America is facing. There's thousands of breweries around the world who are going to need solutions in order to transition to the green economy. And so what Bernardo was mentioning with the Lego pieces is, there's a lot of modular technologies out there in places like Houston, in places like India, places like Germany, that there's people who are finding individual solutions. So what if we just put all those solutions together and also showed at the same time that we could make a sustainable business, to your point of like consumer marketing opportunities, things like that, you can make money and you can also apply these solutions and bring together all this research that's happening, from the international community to basically solve what is not just an individual problem or just our business's problem. It's what does the industry need, and find those solutions through innovation, R&D, things like that. So yeah, it's really about making the change at scale and then sharing that with our competitors or consumers, but also, finding ways to make a sustainable business at the same time.
And that, again, great to hear. You part of your mission being to essentially help build and participate in the circular economy, if you will, and really taking your position as a full participant, not just your niche there, but how do you participate across that circular economy? Really great to see. Maybe we transition a little bit to the supply chain side and talk about what that means to Karbon in terms of Karbon Brewing, in terms of your sustainability commitments, essentially sourcing from a lot of farmers out there. People are interested in where's their food coming from these days? Where are the ingredients coming from and what I consume? And how is that playing into your business, and how are you managing that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question to ask. Where are your ingredients coming from, right? You have this immense transparency in your food products at this point, where you go to a restaurant, you ask where this was grown or where this was made, or who the farmer is. And there's some sort of transparency in the supply chain there for the food products. But then you just go and you drink a Budweiser or a Molson, or you drink, one of these macro or even micro breweries that have shipped or imported ingredients from all over the world. And there's a carbon footprint associated with that, as much as, what economies are we supporting and where is our dollar going? So, that is a core philosophy of ours, is we want to educate the consumer to ask questions like that. Where was your beer grown? Right? What ingredients have gone into your beer? Where did those come from? What practices are in place for the supply chain from a social perspective, as well as an environmental perspective? And so, one of the key concepts, everyone says, buy local, buy local, buy local. But if that local producer is also using crazy international ingredients that, maybe aren't from the right place or from the right part of the supply chain, then that also doesn't necessarily have a great, economic impact. So one of the things we did was go look at these farms that are trying to do things better or trying to do things better in our communities. As I mentioned, part of our story is connected to this place called Wolf Island, which is just outside of Kingston. And there's a local hop producer on the island, Wolf Island Hop Farm. And so basically we drove up to them one day and just said, hey, we're going to start a brewery like this. Do you guys want to be one of our producers? And they said, of course we do. That's what our business is about. But the scale that we need to get to with these local producers needs to increase. So, again, it's all tied into this aspect of, if we put sustainability first and climate change first, what are the risks of our supply chain, right? What are the calculations of the emissions that have to go into this? And so all of these things factor into our decisions of where do we get the ingredients that we grow or that we put into our product. Because if you look at the way climate change is going, you see floods, you see, droughts, you see, storms and things like that. That largely affects the agricultural community and the supply chain, or shipping lanes around the world, with COVID and things like that. Where do we get our cans from? What aluminum goes into that? How is that mined? Things like that. Everything in the supply chain has to be considered. And so when we say, okay, we want to support local producers and local growers, we have to go all the way back to where that exact input was created, or how that was created as well. And then we have a responsibility to build up the supply chain along the way, not only for our own personal security and our own, de-risking our own supply chain, but also the transparency aspect and the economic aspects.
Yeah. So a couple things on this I wanted to ask. First one being, in trying to source locally, like you said, sometimes you may have a potential supplier and they might need to scale up to meet your demands or many companies' demands. But there's also potential out there, I would say, with, let's say, using technology. Right now, it can be difficult to source your hops from 20 different places. You'd prefer to source from one, because that makes your administrative life easier. Also, maybe foresee a future where there could be 20 hop providers that could satisfy your needs, not only for local, but also variety, quality, et cetera. But you're looking at technology systems that might make it easier to source from all these different organizations and bring that into yours, so you can support that local production without really being stuck trying to say, I need a really big supplier so that I don't have to deal with all the admin hassle.
Yeah. And again, it's just diversifying where this supply comes from, right? Right now, we're not in a position to be able to make those kind of decisions, right? Most of the supplies that we need come from international communities, not from Ontario or from, the local producers here. So probably Bernardo has a lot of input on the technology portions of it, but, the agricultural technology has to get to the point where it can produce, a certain amount of yield that we can use or tap into. So, there's a lot of factors there of, how do we build this local supply chain? Is it one producer? Is it 5 producers? Is it 20 producers? But right now, what they need is support, right? These, nobody's going to approve funding for a business that doesn't have a proven profit model. So again, these farmers who want to grow, there might be a lot of them out there. They need the support from companies like us to encourage the business plan behind what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I just wanted to open more on the topic and to say that, like, not only from the perspective of like just local for the sake of local, nice challenge that we took on is also in terms of trying to stay somewhat like relevant with the trends in the craft beer industry. Right now, to talk about a little bit about hop, the world market in hops right now for the craft beer industry is definitely the US. They are coming up with varieties pretty much every year, just getting nicer and nicer in terms of what you can do with those hops. But it's also an industry that is very protected in the US, whereas in Canada, the farmers are much more left to their own devices and to their own fate. A bigger challenge for them to kind of keep up with what's going on, and they have to kind of stay with the let's say, the classical varieties of hops that have been there for a while, because they cannot just risk in going with a certain new variety and then it not selling, because they have no protection for that, like being protected by the government. So I've always described it as, like, in terms of varieties, what you can find in Canada, you're living in the 90s. So for us, it was a very nice challenge to try and replicate this we did with our IPA. Let's say a new style of beer that came up like within the last 2 years, and do it only using Ontario hops and trying to get those flavors with the varieties that we have available here. Very nice challenge that we take on. And of course, we have the ability to just go and knock on the door of a hop supplier or marketer from the US and get any type of hops. But we're trying to build this model around local, because we know if they have like a steady demand, they can grow and they can be a bit more riskier into what they produce. Then in terms of technology, hop farming is a process that, well, existed for many years, and it's a very arduous process and very manual labor intensive. It's very hard to kind of automate a lot of it because of how the vines are grown, because how you have to take out the vines. There is, in terms of harvesting, there is a lot of technology that's out there, and that it can also be developed into like less impactful, like in terms of fuel and what you use. And we'll see more of that in the future. But more or less, like the hops are, there's very little tampering that happens with the hop, in particular when you get them from a farmer. Like the most that you get is drying and pelletizing. In the most, it's kind of challenging. Also, what we're doing now is building like this portfolio within Ontario of farms that we want to work with and support, because again, if we get, like you said, 20 small mid-sized hop farmers, we might get what we need. And it's just developing. The beauty about doing is that it's about developing these relationships. We have a very good relationship with Wolf Island Hop Yard. We have a great relationship with Clear Valley Farms in Collingwood, Ontario, which is our other supplier of hop. And we're developing a new relationships. We might not need their hops now, but as we grow, we'll definitely will. So it's like building that portfolio of people that you want to work with and that have similar point of view as you.
One aspect of this sort of supply chain side that we've also seen emerging is, if you will, online decentralized marketplaces, essentially, where it's easier for buyers, for example, yourselves, restaurants, whatever, to go out and in a digital marketplace and find products that they might not even know about, but from very small producers. And we see that happening across the food space, whether it's people cooking food at home and directly selling it online, to agricultural suppliers who are, making their, for example, what might have been waste products before, they're now being consumed by companies that go out and use these unattractive fruits or vegetables in products. So I could see the same thing happening here, and you're already ahead of the curve on kind of making progress on that. I wonder if we maybe switch a little bit to kind of look at the downstream side of the business and being in contact with your customers, and what are they looking at? Because you're doing a tremendous amount of work essentially on their behalf. And how are you educating them about that? How are you allowing them to look back through your business and through your supply chain to understand the quality and the sustainability of the product that they're consuming when they're drinking a carbon beer?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's something that I think is not solved yet in the beverage space specifically. Sustainability and climate change have been around for decades, right? People have known about this problem for a long time. Whether consumer trends have reflected that or not, we got to the point where a lot of companies were saying they're sustainable, but there's not a transparency there. And so they're being called out for greenwashing and things like that. And so, how do we authentically educate our consumers on the fact that we're trying to do this properly, right? If we just slap a green sticker on and say, okay, we're sustainable, what does that mean? And how do you define what that means to the consumer in an approachable way where they understand that this product on the shelf is actually better than this product on the shelf, or better for the environment, or better for you. So, a large portion of what we're doing is, we're having to spend money on education, which is, a challenge that a business like ours as a startup, that's a large portion of our money, right? It has to go to marketing initiatives, but the right type of marketing initiatives, right? And so I think we're just at the point where consumer trends are waking up to this. How do I be transparent? To your point of like, where was my product grown before? So there is emerging technologies, as I'm sure a lot of people on this kind of show would know about, which is blockchain, like blockchain, the supply chain, or how do you, make QR codes on your cans that if you scan as a consumer, it shows you the batch that was grown or where it was grown, or, a video about the farmer that created it. And so, that's the kind of tools that we're trying to use is, what content can we give to the consumer? Can we make a video about our hop farmers, or can we make a video or a blockchain or some sort of, transparency aspect to our business that actually shows we're being authentic, we're being true to what we're doing, and here's how we're doing it. And then how do we show that and prove that consistently over time? And so it's a large challenge, but once a consumer understands, I think that they get it, and that there's an immense loyalty behind. If you unlock that, transparency, and you unlock the education pieces that need to go into this, then you will get a consumer for life, or you will start to shift consumer trends in the right direction. But again, we're so far away from that, I think, in the beverage space, where, you still go and you buy a Coca-Cola bottle, or you buy a plastic bottle for water, right? A lot of consumer trends, you just go pick up some bottles of water at the convenience store. And so, what packaging trends can we do? How do we stand out on the shelf, to say that we are doing this? Certifications can we start to look into that people understand right away? Is it organic certified? Is it, fair trade certified? Is it all these things that have been around for a long time? What is the correct way to educate the consumer on such a massive education piece?
On the consumer facing side, of course, this has to be engaging, fun, attract people back again. And based on this type of discussion, it's not so much the pure grab that consumer's attention, grab their information, and how do we force them to buy this product, but more of you're literally looking to genuinely, authentically, and sort of in an entertaining way communicate what you're doing. And it sounds like you're already starting to reach out and understand the technology mechanisms on which that's going to happen, where somebody may scan a QR code on your can that will bring verifiable credentials, if you will, of the history of your beer, interesting media interactions for people that actually make them want to buy it more, and really be able to appreciate the work that's gone into that. So great to see that that's going on. I can see that also probably in the first half of next year, you're going to have progress on that maybe, and there'll be some more discussions we could have there. But before we kind of run out of time on this podcast, Stephen, about activities you've had recently, and I think this really highlights to our viewers that not only do we see all these activities happening at Karbon Brewing, but you're personally making efforts to go out there and participate in the global sustainability community. And maybe tell us a little bit about your journey to Scotland about a month or two ago.
Yeah, of course. And I think a large portion as an entrepreneur, you need to continue learning, right? We're talking about trends. We're talking about what does the future look like? That is what my job is. What is the future of this business? What does the future of Karbon look like? And in order to do that and get the information that I need, you have to do the personal education. And part of that was I got invited by a media company to go to COP26 in Glasgow in November this year. So again, I got to
interrupt you just for people that don't know. COP26, Conference of the Parties, the biggest sustainability carbon management event in the world that attracts world leaders, business leaders, literally thousands and thousands of people to talk about this and make plans. So that's COP20 is. By the way, it's hard to get there also, and hard to get in and hard to get attention. So you made it in. Tell us about your experience there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's Conference of the Parties, United Nations. It's all the governments get together. But not only that, there's also these sub events or side events that are happening alongside, almost like a music festival or a party in a lot of ways. But businesses need to be part of that conversation, and they need to be in that room when the government is deciding how this is going to be done. At the same time as the people are there protesting, there was a lot of protests in Scotland, and so it's a combination of consumers and people, businesses and governments that have to kind of work together on this problem. So to your point, it's really hard to get in. You have to get invited, basically. You have to have a media credential, or you have to have an invite from a government as far as a consultancy role or something like that, because it's not accessible to the public. But this COP was very, very unique in the sense of there's a lot of attention coming off the back of COVID on the issues of climate change and, how does that affect everybody in the world? The trends that I saw there were basically, how are we working together as an international community to transition the economy to the just transition to, this new green economy? And that not only affects my business and my supply chain and the future of food and beverage, but it affects everything. So it affects energy usage, it affects transparency, supply chain, all of these things that we're talking about today. Everything that I was learning there was that I'm not the only one working on this problem. We have a long way to go, but we're pretty optimistic in the sense of, people are talking about these issues behind closed doors. Maybe they are actively doing it in the public or protesting, but, people are talking about this. The world is starting to wake up to this. And so a lot of what I took away from that experience, not only from a personal perspective, was how are we going to make this shift to where we need to get to in the future? What does the next 10 or 20 years look like? The measurable results or the steps that we can take, not only as a business leader, but as, community and international community. So it definitely was a really cool learning experience. And to your point, I encourage people to be part of these discussions because, not only is it still being formed on where we're going to go as a society, but also, how can that affect economies, industries, and people and consumers, right? So on my behalf, I'm there representing obviously Karbon Brewing, but in a lot of ways, I'm representing small business owners. I'm representing the consumers that buy my products and what do they want and what do they want to see. And so lots of education, lots of discussion, new trends and things that you see emerging and what the future looks like.
I think this is, and the reason I brought it up, it's an amazing representation of the commitment that you as founders and that Karbon Brewing has to sort of living what you say and building a sustainable business, literally carving out a fair amount of resources, time and money for the CEO to head out to a big, busy party, business, government affair to represent small businesses. So tremendous kudos to you for doing that. And also, I think what we've learned in this podcast is your entire business, literally all the way from the beginning of supply chain of your raw materials, all the way down to how you're interacting with your consumers, including your processes internally for making the product. All of that is incorporating your commitments to sustainability and bringing technologies, whether you're having to invent them yourself or bringing in other companies, but then really making that part of the circular economy that you envision and want to participate in, being willing to share that information with others. So an amazing start to finish business, growing still in your early days. And congratulations on all that. It's been really a pleasure to have you on this program.
Yeah, appreciate that. And that's basically the summary of our entire business model. So thanks for kind of, putting it all together and realizing that by just asking one simple question, can we put sustainability first? It opened up all of those other opportunities. It opened up all those other questions. And I know we haven't really talked too much about the beer, but our beer is pretty good too. So, like the other aspect is you still have to deliver a quality product. You still have to generate revenue. You still have to be a business in a lot of ways. But how can you do that with putting sustainability first?
And I think let's come back to that next podcast. We can focus more internally, sort of on the back end of your process, where it goes beer to customer, and how is that really working for Karbon? Because the product's great. I've managed to have a taste of it also and really enjoyed that. As a craft brewer, you're somewhat regional, so it's hard for somebody in Europe or Asia to kind of get your hands on that. But certainly the influences of what you're doing are being felt in these places as you're using technologies and sharing ideas around the world. So really, I think the community owes you a gratitude for that. And it's been a real pleasure, and we're going to have you back to talk about more details.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you, Bernardo. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
Thanks for listening to FutureFoodCast. FutureFoodCast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.